Good afternoon, thanks for coming. My name is JJ Charlesworth. I'm the reviews editor of ArtReview magazine. This half-hour talk or discussion is entitled rather cryptically in the program, Less is a Bore Against the New Seriousness. At the last Art Basel Miami, when I was wandering around some of these discussions that were happening there too, the respected New York art critic Jerry Saltz did a short talk, a bit like this, about how he saw the economic downturn affecting the art world. His advice was, don't worry. When people say don't worry, I start worrying. For Jerry and many others in the art scene at the moment, it seems, one kind of popular conversation is that the downturn is actually a cloud with a silver lining. Increasingly, it seems that people are very happy to express a relief that the worst excesses of the art market boom are over, and that now we can return to some core values, where a serious engagement in art replaces the frivolous and the frothy and the excessive culture that we saw during the period that emerged and we might call the party years, the last decade of the boom in art and the art market. Now, I'm not one to talk up a crisis. I think it's important not to get too panicky about panics. It's usually why panics happen. But at the same time, I'm a bit suspicious when people start talking about the past as if there was some kind of golden age that has happened before this last decade of exciting and sometimes quite amazing developments in the art world. As if there's a golden age of serious art that the downturn will force us happily to return to. We might be relieved that the boom years of multi-billion-dollar auction sales and diamond-encrusted skulls has for the time being calmed down or abated. But we also know that harder times hit those further down the economic ladder hardest. For example, the many small galleries that have become very important in developing the careers of younger artists are often struggling now, and obviously quite a few of them are closing, and there are some very obvious impacts in the way in which what we are witnessing economically is affecting the current art scene. So if you attended, for example, yesterday's panel discussion, one of the conversations titled Institutions, a Time of Crisis and Opportunity, ? You might have heard 5 eminent gallery and museum directors grapple with the very negative practical effects on them and their institutions of the current economic climate. There are clearly always going to be such negative effects on budgets and programming and so on. But, and this is a kind of question for the discussion this afternoon, are there and could there be positive cultural effects, positive artistic effects of the downturn? Did the boom produce more, just more stuff, or did it produce anything better? And if that wasn't the case, is less really more? And that's where we want to kick off. So to bring in our 2 eminent speakers, on my left is Mark Leckey, artist, Turner Prize winner, someone whose work in many ways reflects on a kind of notion of the excessive or the euphoric or the possibility of pleasure in culture and in art culture. If you had the good fortune to see his lecture performance last night, you'd be probably at Basel's Contemporary Art Museum, and our other speaker is Nikola Dietrich, who's the curator there. So I think I might ask Mark to say a few things to start us off, partly because he's come with a stack of quotes and things to read out, which he feels very passionate about. So Mark.
I did a talk last night, so I'm more prepared than most people would be. But I had a great quote that I wrote down. I went to Venice for the first time, to the Biennale, and I was reading like a bit of blurb there, and I came across this quote. The good thing about the recession is that we will now be able to concentrate on art, on what matters. The bullshit we had to deal with before is over. That's a quote from a curator called Alison Gingaris, who basically curated Pinot's space in Venice, which is like, you know, the apotheosis of bullshit and kind of flash art. So there's like this weird thing going on where there's this idea that the recession was going to kind of come and kind of wash away all the crap and all the bad artists. But then you noticed that all the bad artists were saying it about each other and about you, and everyone's kind of pointing, saying, at least they'll be gone. I heard Tracy Emin saying it the other day. It's like so. And here, I mean, I've only been here, I only came here yesterday, but I mean, I don't have any sense of a kind of recession. I've noticed it a bit in New York. There was things I was hoping to do this year that I kind of fell through a little bit, but not massively. But it does seem that there's this kind of like desire for a crisis, this kind of self-induced, self-willed kind of crisis, because I don't know if everyone feels that somehow art as it is, as it stands now, has to change, has to transform itself. The idea, though, that the last 10 years have been like, you know, just baubles and kind of fancy knickknacks isn't true in my world, in my art world. And people have had to struggle over the last 10 years. I mean, I only started making money like 2 years ago. And people I know I'm still not making a lot of money, who are great artists. So it's not, you know, there isn't that much money. There wasn't that much money swilling around anyway. It was only like going to the cream, going to the top. In terms of what you're asking, the question you've got, I think basically I lived through 2 recessions. I'm from the north of England, so when I left school, there was a recession, and then when I came to London, there was a recession. I won the Turner Prize, and then there's another recession. So it seems like bad luck's going to dog me all the way. But the way, you know, recessions are just miserable. They're just a slow scraping boredom. You know what I mean? It's nothing. There's nothing glamorous about them. There's not a kind of sense of exciting crisis and overturn. Gradually, something might happen. And I guess, shall I carry on talking, or shall I shut up now?
Yeah, by all means. You're sounding good.
I guess, I mean, the thing, all right, so the last one I remember is late 80s, 1990s, where you got the YBAs, and they came out of the recession then. And the idea was that the YBAs kind of found these empty warehouses because everything was shut down, and kind of put on these shows themselves, and it was all kind of self-supported and done by the kids, like some Cliff Richard film or something. And and it wasn't, you know, it wasn't. It was kind of orchestrated. There was money behind them. There was Saatchi involved. There was like Norman Rosenthal was involved. You know, people were supporting them from the start. So it's not. I'm not expecting that to happen again. I mean, it might get. If there is a transformation in art, it will get organised by someone who's already here. You know, it won't be from outside. But I guess, have I said too much? I guess the fear is that eventually, what happened with the last recession is that artists like in England, like Bill Woodrow and Richard Deacon and all that kind of generation, were completely kind of washed away by the YBAs, and no one had any idea or predicted what the YBAs would be. You know, no one saw that coming. So I guess there's a kind of anxiety amongst artists that the next generation of artists, you don't even know what they're going to be doing. Yeah. They could be like transplanting legs on their heads, or, you know what I mean? It could be, or just working with eggs or something.
Nikola, do you want to come in and either respond to Mark, or you were saying just before we started that here there's not so much of a feeling of a problem.
No, I mean, what I meant was, first of all, and that is maybe has to do with how I work and how I always used to work. I'm an exhibition maker, and I would say like these art crises, this market crisis, and like all these headlines that we see in newspapers of like the new chance that we are encountering now, that I'm not so much. It's not something that is relevant to my daily practice when I'm working with artists and mainly young artists in the Contemporary Art Museum, and beforehand I was working at the Porticus in Frankfurt, which is again like a laboratory sort of exhibition hall for young artists that is connected to the Städelschule, to the Art Academy in Frankfurt. And so somehow I was always working seriously within the art world. And so this new question, or this question of the new seriosity, new seriousness, is maybe not so much touching on what I'm working on a daily basis. And I would have a question in general, like when you read all these headlines in the newspapers, and you always have this term of the seriousness, and then you have the term of the price politics. And for me, it's always the question, how does this kind of belong together? How you equalize? I mean, there's always this equalization of a high price and a serious work of art. So I guess there's also then needs to be a definition also on what is the authentic, serious art. What is a qualitative piece of artwork?
Yes, there's often a tendency to suggest that actually even the rise in prices somehow undermines what the value, the critical value, or the actual art value of the things which are actually being celebrated by these huge rises in prices. So it's true that there is increasingly a sort of anxiety, it seems, about the relationship between how the market manages art, or interfaces with art making, and how that in various ways makes it very difficult to assess or assert the true value or the real value of art. But another point that's interesting that you're just making is that working within an institution which is not directly involved in the commercial art market, you seem to be suggesting, or maybe I might imply it, that actually it's commissioning institutions, public institutions, non-market institutions that in some way preserve a serious practice.
I would say so, because there's always a place, and especially in a space like the Porticus or in the Kunsthalle here, also in Basel, but also in the Museum of Contemporary Art, a space for experiments. And I think maybe this is also like a term that is kind of like old-fashioned now, like which was with the boom kind of neglected a little bit, like the process within a piece of art, the experimental, also the freedom to experiment. And I would say that spaces like Kunsthalle and the Museum of Contemporary Art are spaces where artists have this freedom of elaborate on that, and to not have like the perfect end product on stage somehow.
Because Mark, you have moved in between the two very successfully. Now, for you, do you see a distinction between commercial, public, in terms of how they enable you to do what you want to do? And so, is it worth even discussing a distinction in terms of these questions?
Yeah. I don't know, I'm more interested in this idea that somehow, that without the market, that art can be more kind of experimental or more open-ended, because to me it doesn't seem that it's the market that dictates that. It's professionalization, which is distinct from the market. I mean, it's part of the market, but it's distinct from it.
That's
you know,
yeah.
and the whole apparatus, the whole kind of art world apparatus. You know, if you make a work that's experimental, then it can't kind of get reviewed in a sense. You know what I mean?
It can't get reviewed.
Yeah, it's like incapable of being reviewed in some way, because it's not finished product. Therefore, it can't have a finished product of a review kind of attached to it. You know what I mean? I don't know. I can't see how someone like Frieze could deal with like a true experimental space. Do you know what I mean? They just haven't. It just isn't there in the format. You know? So it's kind of. So anyway, there is
a kind of slight pessimism now. It seems more than ever that you can actually have artworks operating in the market in a way which still produces something critical, sophisticated, deep, interesting, you know, troublemaking? Why does it have to be that just because it's a thing, that somehow it it lacks the potential, you know, for all those things? That's an interesting thing, because I think you hear that more, you know, you get that more as a sort of pessimistic, slightly sort of downbeat feel about, oh, well, there's, you know, these art objects. You know, everybody keeps talking about art objects and the unique piece and, you know, the commodity and so on. And we're so, in a way, we're so ingrained with those kinds of quite old critical perspectives that there's this kind of slightly downbeat mood about the art object or the, you know, the market artwork.
I guess it's
being no longer where it's at.
Yeah, because it's kind of ineffective, isn't it?
Right.
And that's the thing I feel the most, is that you make work and it just feels ineffectual.
You know, what I also kind of wanted to mention, or what I meant also was that there's this space of production within an institution maybe, and then there's this space of exchange, like exchanging goods, exchanging art objects, which is which I see is there's a cloud here and there's another cloud here, and they're not touching each other, and maybe this fast exchange of goods, of objects is is kind of not so important any longer, or not so, but more the concentration again on a practice that also needs time.
Yes.
Right.
To come back to some of your earlier comments, I really liked the idea that we actually desire a crisis.
Right.
Because that's not just objective. There's always a subjective aspect to how people respond to a situation of recession or boom or whatever. This idea that it's self-willed or self-induced.
Yeah.
And before we came on, we were talking a bit about the idea of melancholy.
Right.
Or the melancholic. There seems to be a sense in which you can't, you know, recessions don't just repeat themselves, right?
Yeah.
And the reaction to, the cultural reaction to recessions is never going to be the same in each one.
Right.
And so I think it's very important, as you say, to note that it's not going to happen the same way it happened at the beginning of the 90s.
Right.
For example, the YBAs. Do you think that that kind of that desire for a crisis, or that sort of feeling of, you know, self-induced aspect of bringing it on, is a kind of a sense of exhaustion in culture?
Yeah, that may be a little bit.
I don't know. I mean, we're just getting a bit miserable here.
No, I think I don't know.
Have we come to a dead end? Is my real question.
I don't think you can ever talk about dead ends in any real way, but I have a sense of crisis in myself perpetually. No, I do. And I have a real anxiety about art making and making art for this kind of environment. I mean, I love the art world. I love coming here, and I kind of love these kind of events like this. And some of that I love, but not entirely. Because of what I was saying before, it's ineffectiveness that kind of induces this crisis in me. And the only way that art can be effective is through the market, is through the price tag. That's the only way. I'm talking about an effect outside of this.
Right.
It just gets so kind of hermetic in here, and I think. All right, I'm going to try and kind of explain something. I did this talk last night, which is called The Long Tail, and basically it's this economic theory about the internet, and it's this idea that in the internet, with the internet, objects become art objects, any objects become kind of dematerialized, and their kind of value is sort of transformed in the digital realm. And part of this notion of the long tail is the idea that anyone can produce anything in this long tail. Anyone can make their own video, you know, like YouTube. Anyone can make their own goods. So you get this kind of deprofessionalization, and this deprofessionalization is kind of affecting, you know, newspapers, television, music biggest, you know.
Yeah.
It's completely decimated the music industry. But the art world remains kind of aloof from this. It remains above it because basically you can't translate the aura of an art object digitally. It won't translate into that realm. And we're not. Thanks for that.
Okay.
And we're not prepared to kind of give up that aura, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I could make art in the long tail, yeah, and I kind of happily could do that, but I'd lose all of this,
Right.
and I'd lose this, you know. I'd lose my income, basically, and I'd lose respect and other things that count, because I'd become anonymous there. I'd become invisible with everyone else. But I do think that the feeling I get is that I am in retreat from that world, and that world is in advance. And I feel that the art world in itself retreats, and as it retreats, it becomes more melancholic, you know, because it retreats into this past. When I teach at a school, at the Stadel School, and a lot of the students there, not overwhelmingly, there's some good students that have come out of there, but there's a real sense of kind of like melancholy in the work they make. It's all a kind of a sort of playing in modernism's ruins, basically. It's kind of adapting modernism, you know, picking up modernism, playing with modernism, and it just seems like this kind of morbidity, you know what I mean? It becomes kind of morbid, and I mean, I guess what I'm saying in a simple way is a sense that the art world does seem too hermetic and uninvolved in the world out there.
Yeah.
And that's the problem I have with it, except for the market. And then the market registers, you know.
Yes.
Like
And you think this is like the safety corner where the students are...
Yeah, or us, we're the safety, you know. We're the idea that things, you know, are disappearing from the world, and we're going to carry on kind of holding on to them and making them, and, you know.
I feel a vibe of disagreement there.
No, not at all.
Oh, okay,
no,
fine.
I completely
Vibe of
agree.
agreement then.
No.
Okay. Then we should have some questions then. If we've suddenly ground to an agreement hold.
All right.
Which is nice. So we got 5 minutes or so for some questions or comments or retorts. Put your hand up. Hang on, just, microphone.
Hi. This thing that you mentioned about kind of tendency of current arts of in playing on modernism's ruins, and do you find this boring?
Yeah, terrifically. I mean, I really do.
Because you see it as a fad or a fashionable thing.
I find that it as a student, if you attend our college now, most students come there in the first year and kind of abandon what they were doing previously. I mean, that's always the way, yeah? So you give up what you were good at drawing or whatever, and you get to art school and you're introduced to a whole different discourse. And so they look around for something to do. They don't know what to do. And this modernism, its ruins, is available to them. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of the easiest thing to make work about. You know, you research, you go on Wikipedia, do a bit of research, you know, find out some obscure fact about some obscure artist and kind of like attach it to another obscure bit of information, you know, present it formally, not too big, not too small, you know, put it on the wall and bang, you've made art, you know, you've made art. And that's hard, it's hard to make art, you know, for people to recognize it as art. So with that, it's kind of an easy path to kind of producing an artwork. Does that make sense? And it's just kind of boring as well. I'm bored of modernism, you know. What? It's like 100 years ago, man. Get over it, you know.
There are others, yes. Put your hand up so I can make a note of you if you want to speak.
So if you're bored with modernism, what do you think of the ultramodern?
Uh-oh.
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 Well, we were ready. Yeah. You want to, Nikola?
No.
No, it was
you
your
don't want to do
subject.
it. It doesn't. I don't know. I don't know what it meant. Some bit of French flim flam. I didn't really. You know. No, I'm being silly. Go on.
No, I'm just pointing at people who want to speak so that they know that they can speak. But I guess, I mean, what I found interesting about the ultra-modern is that somewhere tucked away in all the kind of talk about trying to shift from a kind of a notion of history and post-modern history, which is about a melancholy mourning, you know, very much in the same way of a past which can no longer kind of go forward. Then it's Nicola Bourriaud is looking for a way to kind of keep a kind of positive notion of what society is and what culture is, with at the same time as keeping well away from the idea that society might actually move forward. So the struggle in ultramodern is to try and actually make modernism, but without the bit in modernism that goes forward.
Right.
That would be my, you know, basic summary of it. And
it's
it's
still
it's
horizontal.
It's trying to find every sideways maneuver you can make into culture, into globalization, into identity, you know, and community, without then saying maybe you can actually do something that transforms culture, art, society all at the same time, which is what heroic modernism, utopian
Well, we're
modernism is
terrified
about.
of that, aren't we?
I think we are terrified of it.
Terrified
Shall
of
we
that idea.
bring a gentleman at the back?
Yeah, if you tired of the new modernism, don't you think that arts last a lifetime, and probably the new modernism may come to be an old kind of art, probably sometime in the future?
Sorry, I didn't
Like
get that.
arts do last a lifetime.
Art doesn't.
Yeah, arts do last a lifetime. That means they live after the artist several years and they become appreciated after some time.
Right.
Don't you think the new modernism would be appreciated sometime in the future?
It's possible.
Do you want to answer that one?
Well, I think the gentleman's asking, with that, do we know what is happening, or can we detect changes which are actually going to be more understood in the future? I think is perhaps the point. But I think, you know, in terms of art practice, which is not anxious about the past and not completely attached to the object, do you see a potential there? Do you see that actually there has been emerging potential in that form of
You mean
art
the
making?
last month now?
Maybe
Or
in the last decade, let's say. So are we seeing the kind of slow fading away of a kind of culture of the thing, you know,
Right.
present company accepted, or rather, you know, and are we moving towards a culture of the event again?
I don't really think so. I think it's. I would rather say that we're moving towards that we have this a new need of understanding, maybe that might also be what the artists are looking at for an understanding of the very moment, and maybe that would also then shift away again from searching within the ruins of modernism. That we're feeling more the now and the moment. That's what I would think, and that we might feel more attached to community and not having
Right.
these singularities next to each other.
I think community is a good word, but I don't.
Community is a great word.
Because you were talking about art reaching into what's out there,
Yeah.
which it may not be just quite the same as community, but it's about kind of getting outside of your box, isn't it?
Yeah.
At the same time as maintaining a position, which I think is the kind of interesting tension in what you've been
Yeah.
trying to describe.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've said that for you.
Yeah.
Right. We've got time for maybe one or two more questions, maybe one.
Sorry, I'm not. Yeah. It seems to me like the period that you're talking about, which everybody sort of agrees in some way was extra frivolous because there was extra money, was also a period where discourse and criticality was spread amongst tons and tons and tons of artists, which seemed to me to be a kind of seriousness, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So instead of saying a new seriousness, we're maybe perhaps moving out of a seriousness. But your Art Review magazine actually just published an article by Chris Sharp, which sank its fangs into what he was calling retard art.
Yeah.
And this movement towards what I see, at least amongst some people around me, towards a kind of discourse of action, or of like Mike Kelly called it like joy of negation, or like the thrill of taking things apart. So anyway, I guess I just wanted to ask if maybe you guys have any relationship to this, to like, I don't know, people like Joe Bradley, Dan Cullen, people who are just actively trying to take things apart.
Who Dan Cullen is?
Yeah, I mean,
for sure. That's what I
you know
say
what I
to
mean?
that.
Like instead of being critical in like beforehand, I'm engaged in a critical discourse, so I make a thing, like making something which is, I don't know, do you know, like critical by how it, by what it is instead of, I don't know.
That's a kind of stretching definition of criticality, Dan Cullen. I mean, you know,
Okay, steady.
No.
It's on camera.
Oh, yeah, okay. Go on.
No, go on then. Yeah, you can slag him off if you like.
Yeah, but that's you know, I'd say he is a product of the market. I mean, I just read the other day. I've actually got his name down here. That's why I kind of overreacted, because you know, in the midst of when everyone thought the recession was going to bite really hard, one of his works went for like nearly $250,000, right? In Sotheby's or whatever. Yeah, and it's like, you know, he to me, I don't know if he's here, but he to me seemed, and Dash Snow and all the rest of them, just seemed like absolute the product of the market, you know. I mean, they've been, in the same way that I was talking about the YBAs, they've been kind of orchestrated, you know. People have invested in them, you know. People who think they're cool, who think they're dudes, you know what I mean? And want those kind of dudes on the cover of magazines.
Other things to say?
That's basically what I think of them. It's, you know, not a lot.
Okay, one more, if there is one more. No? I mean, I think the only thing I have to say about criticality is that people tend to forget that the critical practice generates a market for critical practice too, right? It's not, you know, let's not be naive about this, right? And sometimes you kind of, especially when you get Art Forum and you get that enormous essay on some young artist who's really smart, you know, and written by a very serious writer, you know, it's impossible not to dismantle that event from the fact that then people are going to go, you know, that's a serious price, you know, I'm going to put a price on that head.
Yeah.
You know. So yeah, but at the same time, maybe that's just unfortunate, you know, it's just life.
Yeah.
What, you know, there is a market for things, and people try to evaluate their relative merits, don't they?
Yeah.
And some of it comes out of a kind of culture of criticality or theorizing about art. However, I think one thing I would maybe conclude with on that is that, you know, that culture of critical art practice and theorizing about art, which has, as you say, spread out over the last 22 decades, it may be that it doesn't necessarily do the right critical things in the right places. So in as much as there might be a market for it, which is also a kind of a culture of discussion that supports it, it might just be happening in a very secluded place.
Right.
What is really critical art? Not just stuff that people can theorize as being good, but something that does something dangerous or difficult or risky or risks itself in regards to its position to, you know, a broader culture or something.
That's a key. I think that, because that gets back to what you were saying as well about experiment as well, and that idea of risking something, risking itself, risking yourself.
Yes. So maybe like in terms of the idea of what cannot be perceived, perhaps, in terms of the gent's question at the back, you know, a truly critical art might be not one that you don't notice as doing that just yet. You know, but it might be doing something you disagree with,
right? Okay.
Or you violently, you know, dislike or something. Okay. Anyway, we're going to have to.
Oh, we have to go. We got one more.
Can we just quickly get? Okay, one last, and then we're wrapping up.
That's why, because there's a lot of like critical art that's going on the internet, and using this media maybe precisely because of that, because of it, like. Okay, it's out of the market, it's out of this kind of events, but it's there.
Yeah. I
mean, and it's a real platform. There's so many things that, like, people are kind of working on.
Yeah.
So.
No, I agree. I think, I mean, to kind of get a little bit hysterical in a sense, my kind of anxiety or my crisis is that eventually kind of those voices on the internet basically kind of push this world into a very tight, small corner. You know what I mean? And we just become reduced to like sitting here, kind of swapping little old bits of modernism with each other. You know, while other things are going on out there, this invisible criticality that you're talking about kind of goes on without us. You know what I mean? I think that's what you're saying as well, isn't it?
Having said that, you know, you'll be able to watch a recording of this panel discussion at ArtReview.com, so you can always log on and dematerialize. So we better wrap it up. Thank you to both speakers. Thank you for being here.